guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society.
Well, I don't know, man. Yeah, I don't get that, man. They go through all this trouble to get here and then come here and vote Democrat.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.
Hey, the mic actually didn't get lost with it that time. Good evening, folks. It's a late start. Yeah, I get that. Only goes towards enforcing our need for a little bit better equipment. Would be nice. Eventually, we have some pretty good plans once we get taken off, and we will. This will get taken off. Tonight I have some really good information that will help you guys understand, perhaps the way I understand, what's really going on, right? So we had the Mueller report today, and I'll be speaking on Ann Vandersteel's program, Still Truth. It's a guest subject matter expert in social media psychological warfare this weekend. I think it'll be airing first part of next week. I'll put it on victimoftheswamp.com and the Facebook page with when I get more specifics. What we'll be discussing there, I believe, will largely be related to the Mueller indictments and Russia's connection to the IRA. Their version of the Forced Psychological Operations Group, which is what I was tasked with supporting. So I think I can actually probably offer some pretty good insight into that, right? But I thought before speaking about that, it would be helpful for people to understand why I think the way I do, why I'm worried as I am. I thought one of the best, and I've thought this out quite a bit, right? So I thought, and I go into this actually into my book quite a bit, Victim of the Swamp, how the deep state destroyed the 40-year-old private. You can go to our website, which I do have, which I have made some really nice updates to, right? Let me see if I can switch over here really quick and show you guys some of the updates we've made. Here we go. And I'm actually going to be helping out some other groups around here too as well, with setting up their voices, some production capabilities for them as well. But I've got this set up now. You can order, you can help support my next book, ShadowNet: The American Awakening, by going to our Indiegogo campaign, which you can reach, you can get to from the link right from our victimoftheswamp.com homepage, and you can also order right from our homepage my book from Amazon, the original one, Victim of the Swamp: How the Deep State Destroyed the 40-Year-Old Private. Now, this I started writing back in 2015, but you'll find it highly relevant in the things that we're discussing today, right? The things with the Mueller indictments, right? Why? Because I believe many of these people are attached, and when I lay this out, are all connected to the Force Psychological Operations Group, not the group specifically, but the applications I helped develop for them, which we turned around and made commercially available, called the ShadowNet, right? And I believe that components of the ShadowNet and um, some of the partners at the time, like some of Dynology's partners at the time, like Paul Manafort and others, John McCain, I believe these folks were largely behind um, all of the stuff that we've witnessed for the last couple of years. I believe it was done to set Donald Trump up. I believe it was also done to make sure that Hillary didn't win. And I believe there were foreign influences that were involved, but I don't believe it was Russia. Russia, and I actually don't blame them for doing what they did. But there are really two hats that I wear. I wear one hat that that I wore when I ran for supervisor of elections. It says it's really wrong to mess with America's election process or the integrity of America's election. I wear another hat as a subject matter expert in social media psychological warfare that I'm like, wow, blown away by, impressed by some of these things, right? Our adversaries are coming up with the same, if not better, capabilities than we are and that we have. And we need to address that. But I think before we deal with our adversaries, dealing with homeland, dealing with attacks on our country from abroad, using social media psychological warfare, using the fourth estate and the constitutional protections applied to journalists and actual news outlets and news organizations. I believe we need to address with the domestic issues in some form of like IIA Act or an IIA bill. Uh, I This is something that I'm working on right now. IIA is Interactive Internet Activities, and I think that we need to, we need to look and realize that that this is a problem. Look at what we've dealt with for the last couple of years. But as you're going to see over the next few minutes, the threat is not necessarily going to be from Russia. Threats like this could very well come from the United States. And I'm going to lay out the reasons that I have these beliefs right now, right? So, one of the people and I want to show this actually first, for the specific reason that I'm going to later on show you. Did I put that in there? Oh, I didn't put that in there. Uh, in a bit, I'm going to load that in there in a bit. I got it ready. I'm going to show you a thing from Dan Bongino, and with an article with the Hill that he's discussing. But in order for that to make sense, I want to sort of show you some of the people and some of the things that were involved. Okay. Actually, I'm going to start with the email first. Okay, so let me transition over here. Oh, let me put the little thing on it here. There we go. Now transition. There. Okay. So this is an email. One of the last correspondences I had between myself and Dynology prior to leaving South Korea, and I'm looking at it sort of on a smaller text. I hope it looks okay to you guys. But I'm going to. This is an email to set it up, elevator version. I had refused to provide administrative access to a classified network to a government employee, actually a division chief, because he didn't have the appropriate memorandums or authorization. It was my job. I was the Information Assurance Security Officer on a DoD contract working for a company called Dynology. And Dynology was owned by General James Jones, Obama's national security advisor and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. And when that happened, the person who division chief had threatened me with my job, literally said that I'd be out of a job tomorrow, so loud that the guy sitting next to me heard it. We both filed an official complaint of abuse, and the next day my contract was modified. The contract I had been on for 5 years. They removed the requirements only for my position, and then within a couple of days of me being forced to leave, they modified this $12 million contract back to its original requirements, and they replaced me. This all happened, it was triggered the day after, and I filed a whistleblower's request for assistance, but um, it didn't qualify because the contract had started before 2013. So when they had included or said they had included contractors and subcontractors under whistleblowers protection. So this is an email correspondence between myself and David Haas. He was one of the he was like the manager. He answered directly to, at this time, directly to Jim Jones. I had up until, I don't even remember what point it was originally, but for most of my time with Dynalogy, I answered directly to Jim himself. Then they brought in new people. He was the president. Then they brought in somebody else to take his job, and so I was dealing with David Haas right now, right? And this had just happened, and this was a response. Keep in mind, I'm in South Korea, so I send this to him at like wee hour of the morning. And I said, David, please let me know when would be a good time to speak with you. I'd like to try and reach you this morning if possible. And he responded, Patrick, and I had explained to him already in an email what was going on. And he responded back, Patrick, I am awake but headed back to sleep shortly. Don't want to wake anyone by taking a call right now. I am tracking your messages and understand the issues. Buck's decision to have us fill the PAO-KM positions rather than the higher paid and easier to fill J4 positions is typical of the prime sub relationship. The prime takes the high profit positions and gives the sub the lower margin difficult to fill slots. To rub it in, Buck asked me to help with the quality assurance plan for him with no compensation, of course. It's understandable. He gets a bonus for the profit he generates, so he's only looking out for the best interest, which is the highest pay for the least work. Now, I need to stop here to remind you that this is all happening. This is all happening because I refused to give someone who didn't have access or didn't have authorization, administrative access, to a classified network. And now these guys have turned it into a way to make a profit, right? So how can they profit from getting rid of me and then replacing me? He goes on to say, and I actually think this is wonderful, right? About me. But this is why you guys need to understand. He says, it would be nice if everyone acted on principle as you do. But that is typically not how the world works. And you will not find peace if you expect others to operate from a sense of what is right, rather than a sense of what is best for them. Are you following this, folks? Now, keep in mind this next part. I am discussing with Jim. Now, when he says with Jim, he's referring to the son of General James Jones, the NATO Supreme Allied Commander. This is a small family-owned business. Listen, at the time, when I started, there were only about 10 or 15 people working there. Most of them were direct members of the family, right? So you've got all these family members handling all the books, this is actually, the perfect situation for a bad situation. So what he goes on to say is, I'm discussing this with Jim, the president of the company, and we will do what is in Dynology's long-term interest, operating in a way that will grow our work share over time. I will be in touch. Your perspective and your help are appreciated, as is your willingness to take the longer view in building relationships. Right? It's all about putting company before country, folks. Now, let me introduce you to why I have the problem with this. Here's a video, and this will also tie in. Remember, when you see this video, it's going to tie into a video I'm going to have to throw up here in a moment of Dan Bongino, which I will, but bear with me just one moment. While you're watching this, I'll see if I can't get that loaded, the Dan Bongino. So hold on one moment, folks. This is good.
You contrasted the relationship that President Obama had with President Medvedev and Putin, and you clearly made the point that the prior relationship was better. I was reminded of Lord Palmerston that countries have no permanent friends, only permanent interest. Were you saying that it's a shame Obama didn't have a friend in the Kremlin?
You know, one of the lessons that I walked away from in my years in the White House was that it was very interesting to me how personal relations among heads of state really drive the relationship between nations. And so if the question is it better that these guys get along than not? With the other part of the equation being that, you know, we should be driven by common interests, not, it doesn't matter whether you like each other. It really does help if you do like each other. And President Obama and Medvedev started off in 2009 and hit it off. And at the end of 2010, we had a START treaty. In between 2009 and 2010, they exchanged visits, they exchanged phone calls on a regular basis as we went down the negotiations. And you could tell that relationship kind of affected all the other relationships down the line. Mine with the Russian National Security Advisor, who I considered a friend at the end of 2010. The same relationships with the State Departments, and it just permeated the atmosphere. And by contrast, when Mr. Putin came back in and assumed power, all of a sudden there's that shift. So, yeah, I think personal relationships do matter.
Okay, folks. So, why is that significant? Because the owner of the company, I'm pointing over there, the owner of the company, for the email that I just read you, and let me remind you, the president, his son was the president of the company. The president of the company now owns ClearForce. Now is president of the gym that's being referenced in this email. Now is in charge of the company called ClearForce. ClearForce has taken components, and go back to other stuff that I've talked about here. Components of the ShadowNet are used in ClearForce, as well as criminal background, everything. It's a huge mass surveillance, mass collection by General Jones, his son, CIA Director Michael Hayden, and a handful of other Democrats, and some big people with electronic medical records companies, medical companies, and like TransUnion or one of those others. So these are big people who are in charge of ClearForce. The person who's the president of ClearForce is Jim in this letter. The person you just saw on there is his father, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and the owner of this company, Dynology, who says, I am discussing with Jim, and we will do what is in Dynology's long-term interest, operating in a way that will grow our work share over time. And remember, this is in response to them modifying a $12 million contract, replacing the requirements for my position They actually replaced the requirements of my position with another position for the PAO. That position required a bachelor's degree and other things that I didn't even possess to begin with. So I would have been eliminated from the. In all reality, I was actually not even possible for that. Even the, it doesn't matter. But what they did is, as soon as I left Korea, as soon as I flew out, within a couple days, they modified the contract back to its original requirements, and Buck had just they just replaced me, right? So actually, in the process, the program manager probably made a little bit of extra money based on David's comments here. But the person that I just showed you, who has that close relationship with Russia's national security advisor, and I would argue the same people who would have the ability to work with or get access to the Russians that were involved in the Mueller indictment in the report today, like with the IRA, for example. Okay, who has the relationship in our government that has the influence operations background, that owns the shadow net, that has a relationship with Paul Manafort, that has a relationship with John McCain? Who has all of that? And I'm showing you here an email that describes their corporate ethics, right? This is the ethics of this company. It says in this email, he spoke to Jim, the president of the company. His father, they've been making money off defense contracts, while General Jones was a 4-star Supreme Allied Commander. How? Where's the ethics in that, sir? As a 4-star general, where is the ethics involved in that? So we're supposed to believe that that General Jones would somehow have the ethics not to do something like this? I don't believe that. Nothing I've seen shows me that. So while I'm going to keep talking here real quick, and we're running beyond we're going to run over the 20-minute thing probably, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to try and load on the fly. It doesn't, if you knew, like my mouse is messed up, if you knew what I dealt with to bring you guys all this. Okay, let's do with the media source. Bongino. This is good. You're going to like this. It explains what Bongino's looking for. Come on. Well, okay. Actually, I don't know if I have that. Videos. Bear with me one moment, folks. I may not have that. Don't have it. So what Bongino was going over there, and this is, I'll just discuss it, okay? What Bongino was discussing today on his show. Can you believe I'm sweating like crazy? I've just got a fan here. We're saving money on air conditioning. Bongino spoke today about an article in The Hill where the reporter, can't think of his name, Jonathan, I think. The reporter, his number one question that he believes should be derived from or asked of the Mueller report is something to the effect of, well, we want to know, going back to Hillary Clinton's involvement with the Russian dossier and Steele's involvement with the Russian dossier, right? Great. They want to know going back to that, right? I'm arguing based on the Jones thing you just saw and others. I'm arguing that shouldn't we go back a little bit further? Because if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Fusion GPS was the original creator of this. A Republican, a group of Republicans, or a Republican. I don't know for sure. I've heard speculation. Some people have speculated. I think Will Johnson said he had heard that it was Jeb Bush that started it. I think it's important to know because one common denominator you'll find with all the reporting, both on the left and the right, is that there were both Democrats and Republicans involved in everything Russian collusion related. And there is always Democrats and Republicans involved in the Ukrainian thing that's going on right now. You've got Ukrainian officials saying how Democrats were trying to use use them to hurt Paul Manafort here, right? And these are Democratic operatives like Paul Manafort, like Podesta and the Podesta brothers, right? Jones, he's a lobbyist. Dynology, all of these companies play with lobbying and such, and sell their wares to these other countries, right? Which is kind of what we bitch about Russia. Actually, it's not even kind of. We indicted 13 Russians for doing that to us, which is why I'm going back to the IIA Act. We need to do something like that. But the issue isn't with Russia. The issue isn't with Ukraine. The issue is with people within our own country. And I believe if you take off your political blinders and go beyond Hillary Clinton and the Steele dossier, and you look at who really originally started this dossier, and I have no idea, but if I was in Vegas and I was a gambling man, and also based on me being a subject matter expert and having personal knowledge and relationships and having worked with these people for 8 years, I would say look very closely to the origins of with Fusion GPS and the Republican group that started that originally, and you're going to find John McCain and or Michael Hayden and or General Jones as one of the Republicans. And if I had money and I could go to Vegas right now and those 3 horses were running, or I could actually do that at the Tampa Bay Downs here. I could go to so if those 3 horses were running at the Tampa Bay Downs, I would put my money on one of them, or I would put my money on all 3 of them for the trifecta, right? Why? Why not? If someone robs a bank, the first thing you do is you look around the community for anybody who was just released from like jail, for example, who had robbed banks in the past, right? You look for people with that skill set. You don't go look for necessarily, car thieves when someone robs a bank. You look first for bank robbers and then move on to car thieves if you don't find anybody that fits the match. John McCain, these guys were all influence operation guys. That's what I worked with them for 3 years. I did contracts with Dynology, right? So I'm going to end my connection tonight with that. I want to tell a Above the Love Sponge story to end this episode out. But I wanted to end this with this email that shows you the type of people that we're dealing with here. Look back, Mr. Bongino, look back beyond the Democrats to who made that dossier, because those people work with the people now. They're all the same people. Your mistake is you believe that because there's a D or because there's an R, they might behave differently. No, it's all about M, money. It's all about P, profit, not politics. Look at the email. It's about company, not country. Because that email was a reflection of me losing my job for doing my job. And I don't understand why people aren't appalled by this, right? Support our troops. I know I was a contractor, but I was military prior to this. I had a top secret clearance. I don't know why people aren't outraged by this, but if we don't do something, if we don't do something to change the laws, if we don't do something like the IIA Act, then we're going to have a problem. And I'll explain that why with my Bubba the Love Sponge story, right? So, Bubba the Love Sponge is apparently friends with Roger Stone, apparently going back for quite a while. And Bubba the Love Sponge, who has a controversial history, but is somebody that I've listened to in the Tampa Bay area probably close to 40 years now, since he started. I kind of stopped listening to him for a bit right when my first child was born, and I started listening to talk radio, oddly enough. But prior to that, and then even after that, because my story, it was cool because I was interviewed by some of Bubba's guys who were there doing an interview at the Roger Stone event, and it gave me the opportunity for the first time to personally, assuming that Bubba sees this video, it gave me the opportunity to personally thank Bubba, because when I was in Iraq from October 2007 to like September, October 2008, it was really hard to be able to. It was really nice to have any connection to home that you could get, right? Things are going bad day, things blowing up around you. You got mortar rounds flying in over your head. You're missing your kids and your family, like in ways that you don't even know. You're thousands and thousands of miles away. There's freaking nothing but dust. The doorknobs are up to 130 degrees hot. Like you have to use gloves to even open or to do the cipher lock on the door. It's so damn hot you'd blister your damn finger on it. So you have these bad days, unlike you have bad days when you're on your way to work stateside. And at some point I ended up getting like a sling box in Iraq, where I could watch hometown programming in a small window about that big, because we had very limited internet access on our program. I wrote about this in my book, right? Because the funny thing about this, it's not funny. It explains everything, the fraud, waste, and abuse, right? So, but that was at some point I did have access to some of the programming back home, but nobody else did. And I didn't originally have access. I think I brought it back when I came back from. I brought it back with me when I came back, and so a staff officer, staff officer walks up to me and says they're doing the end of year financing. And they said, "So what do you need? We gotta use this money or we're gonna lose it." And I said, "Well, I don't need anything." "Well, what do you need?" "I don't need anything." "What do you need?" And they kept pressuring me. And I said, "Listen, what do you need, or we're gonna lose this money?" Like telling you, like, you better do this or you're gonna be freaking out of here, right? So I said, okay, we could use some more bandwidth because we could use some more bandwidth. Literally, I'm sitting there in front of my computer. He's at my desk, standing up. Came into my office. Uh, Another guy was there at the time, Aaron Baker, the guy that was on my team with me, and he literally looks at me and is like, well, "So what do you need?" And I said, "Well, okay, I can only stream my Slingbox in a small window because of our bandwidth limitations with the satellite connection. So, we could use a couple more megs of download speed, and I could watch it in full window and in full screen." I'm like joking about this. Seriously. Next thing I know, they spent $360,000 for a 1.5 meter plus satellite dish and several megs up and down. Way more than. If they don't spend the money, they're not going to get it again, right? So now I was able to, $360,000 later, I was able to watch my Slingbox, my programs from home, full screen. But prior to that, geolocation filtering, Netflix, none of these places would allow you to access, right? So, and then all of the news stations and stuff, they started blocking it because of whatever. But Bubba the Love Sponge, whom I listened to years and years prior to that, when he was on 98 Rock, you gave me that ability to, during those bad times, during those stressful times, you're missing your kids, you're missing your wife, things are going wrong all around you, and you turn on and you come home, you come back to your CHU, your containerized housing unit, and you can watch or you can listen to Bubba, and he talks about, they give weather reports, local weather reports. I think chief meteorologist at the time, I think he was on there. But you had Ned getting drunk. You had the traffic reports I loved, right? Because I would otherwise be sitting in traffic every day driving about an hour and a half to my job in Tampa at a heart and vascular clinic that I was the network administrator of. So every day, an hour and a half each way, there and back to work, I would spend largely in traffic. And now I'm sitting here just a couple years later in the middle of a desert with mortar rounds coming in over my head, thinking, what the hell am I doing, right? Bubba comes on, and I think about my kids now, and I think about being stuck in traffic, and wow, that would suck really bad too. And it sort of it lifted you back up at a time when all of these other companies and all these other stations and such were blocking a soldier's ability. Now, they weren't doing it to block the troops, they were doing it to block other people so they could protect their advertising dollars, right? I tried to actually solve this problem. I saw it as a problem, and I spent almost 7 years overseas with the DoD, both in uniform and mostly as a contractor. But that takes me to my next story, right? Which is about Bubba. It's not really about Bubba, but okay, so Bubba brought that really good feeling to me, right? And I wanted to be able to try to make it so everybody could have it. Because the alternative was to buy like these 6 for $10 made in China DVDs, which had to have viruses all over them, which they were selling on base right out in front of the PX, which I complained about and got in trouble for, because that's just a stupid idea. They were literally putting them on classified networks. And I got in trouble for saying, should we be putting 6 for $10 DVDs pirated DVDs sold on base at the PX in classified networks to watch reruns of 24 Doesn't that kind of create a serious security risk? I got freaking chewed out for that in Afghanistan in uniform. So when I was in South Korea, and I had some time, and they were starting to block all sorts of stuff. Um, and then sort of like, I think Comedy Central was the last straw. I used to love to watch uh, Comedy Central when it had Jon Stewart on there. The other guys are dipshits, but um, uh, they started blocking them all, and then Comedy Central was blocked from being able to watch overseas. So then you're only left with just illegally downloading it through a torrent, or paying a fortune on base. It was incredible, way out of price for the average private. So we came up with a veterans-based nonprofit. Myself, a gentleman named Fred Taylor, who's a three-time Purple Heart recipient. He was back in Vietnam, an amazing man, my next door neighbor, and a huge influence in my life. Myself, Fred, another friend, Ed, who was literally a NASA scientist and a NASA engineer, and another guy who I worked with in South Korea, who was really good at web development. We put together a veterans-based nonprofit, and the purpose of that was to be able to provide video on demand for our troops overseas, through a veterans-based nonprofit, so that we didn't have to spend $100 million a year with uh, AFN, who is literally raping our troops overseas with the cost of programming to be able to watch any shows, and the oh my god, it's a whole nother when you hear what goes on to the troops overseas with what they pay on base as opposed to off base. $140 for the same thing off base is $15. Not even the same thing. It's like 1,000 times better. Whole nother story. When we're talking like internet access and such like that, and programs. So it's really, they were blocking everything. Nobody was doing anything. So I stood up, talked a bunch of friends into. We set up a legitimate veterans-based nonprofit. It was a 501c3. I spent thousands of dollars. I flew from. See, what we wanted to do is currently like AFN at the time, and even now, there was no video on demand. AFN, you had to buy a satellite dish to be able to watch AFN, which gave you about maybe 25 channels or so. Most of that content was donated, right, to AFN. And so I'm like, well, hey, if people are donating this content, like the Super Bowl and everything, to AFN's a government organization, the military, right? So if they donated it to a veterans-based nonprofit, and we handled it, and we provided the content to them, and we verified that they were troops overseas and or contractors overseas, and we verified this and provided restricted access to them of this content, then the content providers would be able to write this off on their taxes. So when the Super Bowl donates the content, quote unquote, donates the content to AFN to broadcast, to make available to our troops overseas, they could actually get a tax write-off on it if they donated it to us. I flew back to the States from South Korea using my vacation time. I went to the NATP convention, the National Association of Television Producers and Executives in Miami, with my friend Ed. We met with executives. Everything was going great. They loved the idea. I went to follow up with them a couple weeks later, and nobody would return my calls. And so I finally got a hold of someone at Fox Entertainment, which is another reason why I don't trust Fox, right? So I get a hold of someone at Fox Entertainment, and Fox said, "Oh, we've heard of you, and we're not doing business with you. And I was like, whoa, what? Wait, how did you hear about it? Did I meet you at the, because everything went really well at the convention. I'm back in South Korea now. I'm following up on phone calls with people, and I'm like, did I meet, was there, what's the problem? And she tells me that, the director of television from AFN, Armed Forces Network, called her up, and I'm assuming everybody, because nobody was returning our calls, called all of these people up and said, don't do business with us. We were going to, AFN is $100 million taxpayer appropriated self-licking pop ice cream cone, right, of appropriations. That's all it is. Imagine if you could use that $100 million to provide, instead of having them controlling the content to the troops overseas, take that $100 million and give it to the troops to use for whatever, right? And have a veterans-based nonprofit handle all of the content to our troops overseas, the stuff that Bubba does, or movies and things like that. And then you don't get the threat of propaganda. There's 1,000 reasons that this is a great idea. But could you imagine that someone did that? And to prove what I'm saying, I filed a complaint with the with the Defense Media Activities Group, who is the DMA, and they oversee the DMA oversees hey, I got Bongino's thing. Cool. The DMA oversees AFN, Armed Forces Network, and here it is. So, this is from the Department of Defense, Defense Media Activity, dated October 19th, 2015. To Patrick Berge, Executive Director, MOPS Network. Dear Mr. Berge, this letter is in response to your March 3rd, 2015 letter to the Inspector General concerning alleged misconduct by Mr. Larry Murata. Mr. Larry Murata was the Director of Television. Doesn't get much higher than that. We conducted an inquiry into your allegations. The lack of cooperation from witnesses identified in your complaint letter, which according to him, when I spoke to him on the phone, meant that when they contacted Fox Entertainment sicked their attorneys on them and refused to answer any questions. Right? And the DMA, the Inspector General, doesn't have the capability of, the FBI. They can't compel someone to do anything outside of the government. They don't have that authority. So he said, the lack of cooperation from witnesses identified in your complaint letter, coupled with documentary evidence we obtained, I have no idea what that is, resulted in insufficient evidence to support an inference of misconduct by Mr. Larata. This office will take no further action pertaining, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, right there, you have, they confirmed, they were able to confirm that Larry Murata, the director of television, called the Fox Entertainment people, spoke to them about us, about our company. Now, could he, was he able to confirm was the IG able to confirm what I stated was told to me by the lady at Fox, which why the heck would I ever just make something like that up? How would I make something like that up? And how would I know that he spoke to her about me? Which they did prove that, right? But yeah, so my claim is that when I called her up, she told me that she had been told by them not to do business with us. And they weren't, nobody was. I have emails with the people in charge of Super Bowl 50. We were going to be the first veterans-based nonprofit to provide free video on demand the Super Bowl 50 to all of our troops and contractors overseas. They were going to be verified through a company called ID.me, who was also a military-owned company, and we were going to provide, and it wasn't going to cost the government anything. Now, within a couple weeks of them making this determination letter, a deal was negotiated and signed with either I was told Comcast, but I was never able to confirm that. But I was told that a deal went through, and a company, either Comcast or another big company like that, got the contract from AFN for millions and millions and millions of dollars to provide video on demand to our troops overseas. So, I spoke to, Bubba's had a lot of trouble. It was really nice. It is really nice having these things. I'm just coming to you as a 40-year-old private, now 53, right? These companies, these people, don't look at it like that. They look at it like, advertising dollars and profit. They don't care that by protecting their advertising dollars, they're restricting the ability, something that provides a great deal of morale and welfare for our troops overseas. And they're doing it at ungodly costs of taxpayers' expense. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And these are multi-million dollars made with private businesses doing shady deals with people like AFN, and then the IG does stuff like this, and you wonder why our government is in the mess that it's in. So I'm going to play this thing from Bongino now, and it explains the Jones video that I played earlier. Watch this, and then we'll close it out after that. Let me minimize that and go. No. Really? Okay, hold on here. I don't have the Bongino thing. I had it put in there, but it couldn't get the audio working, and then so I already told you the deal with the Bongino, so I'm going to close it out now. Look at me sweat. Look what I'm going through for you guys. It's 12:30 in the morning, 12:37 in the morning. So I went way over again. This is a good story. This is stuff people should understand. Look at go back to the letter describing about how you put company before country. Look at the position of the owner of that company and his relationship, General Jones's relationship to the top tier people, everybody that Dan Bongino's talking about, and ask yourself, is this the type of person? Is this the type of company? Are these the type of people that would place profit before patriotism? I say yes. And to support what I say, I give you things like that e-message, a scratch of the surface. So thank you very much for tuning in tonight. I hope everything you've even be able to hear me. And again, it's late. I gotta go over to George's, help him get some stuff set up tomorrow. Looking forward to that. Thank you very much for taking the time. Please subscribe, like, share, comment. These all help. I know we got like only a few people on there. We've just started. I'm not even promoting these yet. That's why I'm not really set to the time. I'm putting these out really more like someone would put out, just upload a video. But I'm actually doing it live. So thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. I'm going to exit with the intro video. I got to make an exit video, but I love that intro video because it tells our story. It tells what we're trying to do here. We need your help, folks. Please go to victimoftheswamp.com. Please click on the Indiegogo site, help contribute to this. If you can't see that this isn't everything we've been talking about for the last 2 years, and that we need to have an awakening, and that we need to have an IIA Act, we need to start putting laws in place with the same, basically taking the same policies, that the DoD put into the IIA policy guide, only structuring those to protect Americans, to protect the sovereignty of our country, to protect the integrity of our election process. And I'm not talking about from the Russians. We need to fix our problems at home first, and then we can look at countries like Russia, and as leading by example, we can say, listen, we need to stop this. We need to stop these influence operations. We need to stop trying to change dictators from one to another. We need to stop trying to influence other countries. We have the ability to do that. It's called the Fourth Estate. We have media. That if the media reported the good that our country does around the world, then people would see it. We wouldn't need America to privatize influence operations that try to influence other people, because they're going to turn around and they're going to try to influence us, just like they did in the 2016 election, which, by the way, it was Israel most largely and most likely, not Russia. And I'll discuss that in more detail with Ann Vandersteel this weekend, or which will be probably first part of next week. Thank you very much, folks. You all have a very good evening. Peace out.
Guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society.
So I don't know, man. Yeah, I don't get that, man. They go through all this trouble to get here, and then come here and vote Democrat.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals.